This is Thursday, the 28th of May, 2020, and I'm doing comments on Pascal Boyer's book, Religion Explained. And we are in this very crucial chapter 4, where he's moving back to talking about why gods and spirits. The first point he has made is that religion is practical. Now, he uses mostly the Fang and Kuayo people as his examples, but I can use many examples of very practical people who are hurting, who are maybe in the hospital. I'm a hospital chaplain, so I spend a lot of time with that kind of need. Persons with that kind of need, and I think, you know, it's important to understand that, well, his next section is called Gods and Spirit as Person, and he says there are not serious supernatural beings like Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. But when we get serious about supernatural beings like Jesus or Muhammad, or some tremendous experience we've had in our own life, I remember a fellow who was he was having chemotherapy. He was at the end of his life. He had cancer, and anyway, he was sharing this experience with me where he had been having chemotherapy and he was by himself, and all of a sudden he felt like there was somebody in the room with him. And he said he had about 45 minutes by himself, and during that 45 minutes he felt this incredible sense of presence that was very, very comforting to him as he was going through his chemotherapy, but also in relationship to what he thought might happen to him. He knew he was going to die eventually. Anyway, one of the things that Boyer makes very clear is that we often, when we think of supernatural beings, we think of them in a kind of human way, with human characteristics. They are very much construed like persons. And he thinks that propensity needs explanation. We need to know why we were doing that. And so he looks at the work of a particular psychologist named, or anthropologist, Stuart Guthrie. And Guthrie noted that there is an anthropomorphic tendency, not just in visual artifacts and in art of many different cultures, but also in visual perception itself. That is, we tend to interpret even very faint cues in terms of human traits. So we look at the clouds and we see a face, and that's a sort of a superficial idea, but you get the idea. We do tend to think in human terms. Now, some people would say that's a reassuring and comforting view, but Boyer just doesn't like that. He doesn't think that. He thinks at best religion is cold comfort. That it has other things it is doing, and so he just sort of brushes that one aside and says comfort is not the issue. The way our cognitive systems work has little to do with our preferences. So that would be sort of going against what Freud says about our moving toward the joyful, happy, sweet kind of thing. Persons are more complex than any other objects. And so when we present them as persons, even though they're persons that we know have some particular biological or physical difference from a regular human person. Our intuitive understanding of persons is just far more complex than our understanding of mechanical and biological beings. So, Guthrie goes on to say that first, note that gods and spirits are not represented as having human features or, in general, having human minds. It is the mind that is the important thing. And so it is. Earlier we talked about people praying, and there were more prayers about changing people's minds than there were about changing the physical reality of the situation. And it is the mind that is most often. Second, our intuitive notions are about agency in general. We are wild about agency. We look out the window, and we see leaves, and we see leaves stirring, and we know, more or less intuitively, that that is wind, but it may not be wind. Somebody might be chopping the tree down. The motion, the agency is what catches our attention first, and what specifically the agent is secondary or less important. Whether what is detected is a person, an animal, or another agent, that is not particularly the first thing, but the movement, what's moving it is the thing. Now, Justin Barrett, whom we've heard from before, first, what happens is religion is not so much that people see faces in the clouds, but traces in the grass. In other words, I remember my wife and daughter and I experienced, we were in our home eating dinner, and I saw out of my peripheral vision motion going up the stairs. My daughter was looking right at it, and as we alerted on it, my wife turned and saw it. Just briefly, it was there and gone, traces rather than. And second, with our agency, we tend to jump to conclusions. We tend to say, now you can see that this is important because and it goes on with a discussion about predation, about predators, that predators, our need to alert to a predator and be very quick to identify a predator or prey is what saves us, or what saved us when we were more in the wild than we are nowadays. The greater skills of understanding other people were required for ever more complex cooperation. Sophisticated mind reading is a substantial asset in stalking prey and avoiding predators. Now, modern humans have a much better understanding of animals' mental states than their predecessors. Predation constitutes one of the central contexts, and in religion itself, not so much in Christian religion, but in religion there are often metaphors about hunting, about predation. Shamanism is often about hunting souls. Anyway, the next part is really talking about gods. Are gods really like predators? And it's a question. Our detection of agency, that has some experimental evidence that they've developed over the years. Sensing the presence of barely detectable agents is generally not comforting feeling. It's true. The whole thrust of this section, though, is basically to say that in religion, often there is a prior concept that one may have the sense of agency, but that sense of agency is often given to us by something we have met already. So I remember having a really profound, about 15-minute experience with God. I still think that. And but I remember I had read not too long before the C.S. Lewis's trilogy, That Hideous Strength and The Paralandra, and the third one I can't remember. But that particular trilogy had an interesting way of thinking about the supernatural as being kind of skewed or off kilter. And this was very much that. And it also, the color, the sort of purple or lavender color, I experienced both of those things. But the reference, the prior reference from Lewis and from other sources made it possible for me to just kind of settle into that experience rather than being alarmed and shutting it off right now. So I very much agree with this. What he's saying here is that we do have a very active sense of agency of what something happens and what's going on, and very often the supernatural things are spontaneous and unique, so they will not repeat themselves, and they do not necessarily let us know exactly what they mean right away. Sometimes it takes a good deal of digging to do that. Of course, they're always, anthropologists are interested in how something like that can be stable in a cultural setting. How does it get passed on from one generation to the next? And he says that that's really the question, and that'll be the next question that he addresses. But he says very much the predator avoidance system, the direct agency system, the inference system that our mind has is very much engaged by these religious experiences, these experiences of the supernatural. He really hates the word religion, but too bad. He's kind of stuck with it. Anyway, so that's enough of that. We'll come back to it next day or two. Anyway, take care.